Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton, Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Greg, are you buckled up and ready for a Wild Wild West version of the not the buzz, the Thursday live stream?
Just based on our, it's only Wednesday, right?
I'm time traveling today, I reckon.
Yeah, I'm telling you. This is Supply Chain Today and tomorrow, right?
With Mike Griswold.
So the reason we're a little bit distracted, gang, is the pre-show discussion was pretty inspiring and fun. So all right, let's start over again.
So Scott Luton, Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. It is all about Supply Chain Today and tomorrow with Mike Griswold from Gartner, one of our most popular monthly series. We've got Mike coming on and talking about supply chain and retail and really global business each month. And we've got a special treat here today, don't we, Greg?
Yeah. We're going to give everyone a shot to ask him almost anything.
Yes. So to Craig, just as you said,
I do the almost small, you do it big. I see.
Well, our team of attorneys said, hey, folks, we love the idea, but let's add one more word, because there's been a lot of these ask us anything sessions. So ask Mike Griswold almost anything right here today on Supply Chain Now. So, but Greg, a lot of good stuff we're going to be posing to Mike. Folks, get your questions ready. We already have a slew of folks in the community. Again, think about retail, supply chain, SNOE, SNOP. Mike joined us last month or the last couple months. We've talked about metrics. We've talked about ESG. Mike leads the Gartner top 25 supply chain ranking. So he's got access and his finger on the pulse of a wide range of supply chain leadership topics and case studies. So y'all get the questions ready. We're going to be opening the floodgates here momentarily. But before we do, Greg, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Are you game?
Yes, sir. Let's do.
Okay. Because if you're not, you're kind of stuck now.
As long as we're in this live stream moment, why not just confess that I'm hearing the guys working on the roof behind me right now. So if you hear anything, hey, you know what? Hashtag COVID happened. So we are where we are, gang.
That's right. And we had the issue when we were in the studio. If you remember one show we had Tony Sharota and Tim Brown with us, and the roof, the folks on the roof were working on one end, and it kept getting louder and louder as they came right above where we were recording the show. So we always got a kick out of that. But I digress. So folks, if y'all enjoyed today's conversation, make sure you check us out, Supply Chain Now, wherever you get your podcast from, so you don't miss a single conversation like the one we're going to have here today. And like we rolled out Monday on the Buzz, we've got a couple of webinars coming up, and we've got a really neat a gift box we're going to be sending out to folks. We're going to have a drawing from folks that register for our webinars or subscribe to our newsletter. Let's see, February 17th, it's going to be all about supply chain transformation with Mars, which we're going to touch on the wonderful candy industry here momentarily.
Yes, sir.
And Kinaxis. So y'all check that out on the 17th. Greg, we've really enjoyed our collaboration, especially with the Kinaxis team, right?
All about what Kinaxis is doing in SNOP planning, delicious chocolate, and my middle daughter Delaney's birthday, as a matter of fact.
How about that?
Right?
So join us.
She won't be on the show, folks. I'm sorry. But
not yet.
Yeah.
Right around the corner.
I thought about having her on Tequila Sunrise because she is a supply chain tech salesperson. So
I think we got to make that happen for sure.
That would be good, wouldn't it?
So
proud papa moment.
So February 17th, check out the link in the show notes. Join us for that one. And we're going to follow it up just about a week later with really a diverse panel across different sectors with our friends at Omnia Partners, really focused around, what supply chain leaders are doing in this, thankfully in 2021 to kind of tackle the new normal, the new environment. I said new normal, I tried to avoid saying that, but we're going to have a variety of perspectives shared, especially as it relates to procurement. Procurement's been a really hot topic here lately. So stay tuned for that. And the link for that session is also in the show notes here today.
And if anyone has any doubt whether Arslanian was born for this. Listen to an episode we did with him some time back. I bet Clay can find that thing, but man, born to do what he is doing.
Agreed.
Right? Much like our guest.
So right before we bring on Mike Griswold for, again, an Ask Mike Griswold almost anything session here today, let's say hello to a few folks that are here. Peter is with us. Peter always brings hot perspective and POV. Great to have you here, Peter. Lee Hoffweber maybe, and apologize if I mispronounced that. Lee, you were there we go. Even better.
That's how he pronounces it.
So Lee had a lot of perspective shared in our reverse logistics and return session last week. Enjoyed that. Pratik, great to have you here as always via LinkedIn. Gary Skinner, Wild West. Yeah, baby. He was with us last week as well. Mike Darden is with us.
Wow. Here, so. Long time no hear. Good to have you here.
Mike and his team have been on the roll. Really enjoyed his perspective on a previous podcast. T Squared, holding down the fort on YouTube. It's hump days, ready for supply chain management lunchtime nourishment. Love that. Amit, great to have you here. Azalea, maybe. Apologize if I mispronounced that. Great to have you back. I've really enjoyed your contributions in these live streams. Praveen, Abdallah, Anna Mary, regular participant here.
Good on you.
Back again. Good on you. All right. So, and there's some calls for a Supply Chain Now golf tourney. Mike,
well, are we talking to the right person or what?
That's right. I'll put my money on Mike there, and I would gladly let him play in my spot. But we'll see if we can't tackle that down the road a little bit. Hey, one more thing here. Colin Yankee, shout out to Mike Griswold. Colin, hello to you and the whole Tractor Supply Company team. He's going to be joining us for a podcast coming up here right around the corner. So, Colin, hope this finds you and your family well. All right. Are you ready to dive in, Greg?
Well, just one more thing that I think it's really important for us to share, Scott, is Paula Mooring, who's joining us, representing the KC. Let's not forget, folks, that it is Super Bowl week. So we will be crowning a repeat Super Bowl champion on Sunday.
What was that? Our attorney's saying, say big game. Big game. We can't say
Super
Bowl. So regardless, go Chiefs. We're all big Chiefs fans here. And of course, Greg is our biggest Chiefs fan, 50-year Chiefs fan, or no more than 2 decades.
No more than 2 decades, right? Right.
All right. So, so much going on. Really enjoyed everybody showing up for today's live stream. We have a wonderful guest here today. These kind of sessions were built for our guest today. I'm losing my voice a little bit. Y'all bear with me. Mike Griswold, Vice President, Analyst with Gartner. Hey, good afternoon,
hey guys.
Mike. How you doing?
How you doing,
great,
Michael?
Thanks.
Well, we went around the horn on the intro. I forgot what day it was, forgot what show it was. So my apologies. But
it was all that conversation about scotch before we got started.
It was, right? It's like we drank it and not talked about it.
You're right. You're right. We really, we're going to have to record those pre-show sessions moving forward. But nevertheless, Mike, I've really enjoyed these monthly sessions with you. We get a ton of feedback. Always get a ton of comments. I mean, you really, it's interesting. Just when I think we get a question that just might stump Mike Griswold, nope. It's like that old ESPN show, Try to Stump the Swami. Remember that back in the 90s?
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
And no one could ever do it. That's kind of how I feel here today with Mike Griswold. So, but all things business and supply chain. So, Mike, we're gonna do a little bit of the lightning round before we get into the serious stuff. Are you game?
Those are always fun.
Okay, so today, as we're approaching Valentine's Day, right? My wife Amanda says yes, that indeed is a gift buying holiday. So I've added that to my checklist. But also, it's a huge day for the U.S. candy industry, probably the global candy industry, I imagine. But did you know for the U.S. chocolate candy industry, it is the 3rd highest volume day, according to some of the best research I could find. Have any guesses, Mike? Any guesses of the first 2?
Well, Easter's got to be up there. And I would say maybe the day after the Super Bowl for Greg when the Chiefs lose.
Oh, so 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. So Easter and Christmas are the first two. So Christmas is the other, and I think Christmas by far is number one, as you might imagine. So speaking of candy, can you share first lightning round question?
Sure.
What's your weakness when it comes to chocolate candy or candy in general?
So there's actually two. One is old school. I don't know how many people, depending on how old you are. I have a huge weakness for Mallow cups. Basically, a Reese's peanut butter cup with marshmallow instead of the peanut butter.
What?
Those can be hard to find, a little bit regional. But the one that everyone can find is I have a huge weakness for Mr. Goodbar. So chocolate, peanuts, pretty much that. If I see one of those somewhere, it's trouble. But the Mallow cups, yeah. If you have not had a Mallow cup, look around, see if you can find one. They're pretty good.
So regionally, where did that come from originally, Mike?
I have no idea. I first, when we were in Western New York, where I grew up, they were pretty plentiful. Now, if I go, we have a couple of specialized candy shops here around where I live. If you go into the specialized candy shops, you can usually find them as well.
When you were at Albertsons, did you manage to sneak them into the product mix?
Yeah, no, the merchants wouldn't talk to me, so no, I never had an opportunity. Right? They didn't talk much to supply chain guys. So
yeah, true.
Rich Richardson is also a big fan of Mallow
There we
cups
go.
There,
I knew I wouldn't be the only one.
And there was a lot of guesses for Halloween being the other holiday. So believe it or not,
that's
Valentine's.
Yeah, I can't believe that. When you think about it, you'd think Mother's Day, Halloween, obviously Easter and Christmas, Valentine's Day, of course. But man, maybe I wonder, it's got to be sheer dollar volume then.
Well,
because you buy a lot of cheap candy.
As I learned in my Google efforts, there's not one great clearinghouse for candy insights and data, especially free. So y'all check it out.
There's a business opportunity, folks.
That's right.
HandyDataClearinghouse.com.
That's right. A couple of the comments here. These Mallow cups we've hit a nerve here. Love Mallow cups in West Virginia, says Azalea. Don says they were a staple for us in North Carolina. And Rich also says they had fake coins. You can prizes.
Yes.
How about that?
The problem I always had
what a blast from the past. It's amazing
I think the Mallow cup users will agree with me. The problem I always had is the marshmallow would leak out of the bottom and it would stick to the little wrapper. So you always lost a little of the Mallow cup as you were trying to get it out of its wrapper.
Oh, yeah.
But it was worth it.
That's outstanding.
All right. We're going to have candy.
All right. That's a blast from the past, but let's, but I know we're going to allow people to ask you anything, but I want to ask, to me, what I think is the most important question for Mike Griswold to answer.
Yep.
First of all, by the way, one of the things that we were talking about when kind of prepping for this was we should ask Mike what a Griswold family tradition is for Valentine's Day. And I thought that is a whole other movie, isn't it?
It is. It's a movie waiting to happen.
National Lampoon Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
No, so obviously it's basketball season. We're coming up fast on the tournament, right? And of course, you have your own, and we'd love to hear how your season is going, if it's going. But I'd love to get your insights on what do you think the tournament looks like. Give us a Final Four prediction.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you one on the men's side and one on the women's side. The men's side will not be a surprise. I think Gonzaga is probably the team to beat. Baylor is a good second choice, but Gonzaga was probably going to be in the Final Four last year, and they just got better this year.
Mm-hmm.
On the women's side, while they're not number one, I'm a huge Connecticut fan. They're young. They've got a really, really good team that I think will grow into they'll be a 1 seed in the women's tournament. There are some really good women's teams. North Carolina State, Stanford, South Carolina, just to name a few. But to answer your question, I'm going to take Gonzaga on the men's side and UConn on the women's side.
UConn on the women's side. You really went out on a limb there, Mike.
Yeah, I know. Let me give you, we talk about the supply chain and we talk about supply chain excellence. Let me just give people something to think about who may care nothing about basketball. To put this in perspective, Gino Auriemma is the winningest men's coach in women's basketball, 11 national titles. He has gone over 1,000 games without losing games back to back.
Wow.
Think about that. That's probably close to 30 years. He has, and again, for people that aren't familiar with UConn women basketball, they don't play a cupcake schedule. I mean, they play a very, very difficult schedule. So the fact that he's gone that long without back-to-back losses is just mind-boggling.
Really is.
Yeah.
Legend.
Yep.
So much to learn from his leadership, his approach. Of course, he's got that famous quote about work ethic and some folks mail it in. I can't remember exactly the paraphrase. Some folks mail it in and wonder why they don't get earth-shattering results. So but Greg, we could talk a lot about sports, and clearly we could talk a lot about Mallow cups. That I would have never guessed.
No doubt, right?
Hey.
But what do we? I think we've got a couple ideas.
To
get things going, right?
This has been going around our office lately. We've been talking about SNOP, and Chris Barnes, the host of Supply Chain is Boring, was asking. I think he was giving an educational session, and he was asking, "Is there such a thing as SNOP or SNOE for retail?" And so Corinne and I both kind of communicated back to him. There's not something as such. Mike had contemplated MIOE some years back, and now he talks about it as essentially SNOP for retail. But when you think about SNOP, wherever it's being applied or its variant for retail, what do you think about as the most clear-cut best practices for a good process there?
Yeah, Greg, I think if we think about maybe just a little historical perspective, other industries, almost every other industry has had SNOP for 20, 30 years. And I think for those industries, the fundamental question they were trying to answer is, how do I match demand and supply? Mm-hmm. And I think if we extrapolate that into retail, the biggest factor that I see in successful SNOP and SNOE initiatives in retail is when people can clearly articulate what problem are we trying to solve. And it needs to be a little bit deeper than just we're trying to match demand and supply. We're trying to align demand. If I'm a vertically integrated retailer, I'm trying to align demand into my manufacturing process. I could be, hey, I'm just trying to understand how do I match demand and supply for a promotion that's going to happen in 12 weeks. It could be, we're going to launch this new product, and I need to align the demand for the new product with making sure it gets through, and then out of my supply chain into the stores, as an example. Where I see people struggle in retail is, conceptually understanding SNOP, but they can't go to the business and say, this is the problem we're going to solve. And I think when we are able to say, this is where we're going to target, or this is where we're going to focus SNOP, we've talked a lot in the past about use cases for SNOE. It's the same thing, right? What use case am I going to address? What problem am I going to solve? What metric am I going to impact? And I know we'll talk about metrics maybe in a little bit. But those are the things when I'm sitting down with a retailer and we're talking about SNOP, it's, what problem are you trying to solve? And how will we know that we've solved it? Through the metrics. That to me is the biggest success factor or not in retailers moving their SNOP initiatives forward. What problem are we trying to solve?
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
So if you hadn't noticed, our timing is just a smidge off. I think it's I'll blame it on a delay we've got out here in Walton County, Georgia.
Let's do that. Yeah.
But that's also, I think, a universal. What are we trying to do here? And I think we referenced one of my favorite movies is Moneyball, where Brad Pitt plays Billy, the GM for the A's,
Oh,
right?
Billy Bean.
Oh, Billy Bean.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
And there's a great scene, and Greg, I can't remember if you were on the live stream or the podcast that we were doing. There's a great scene where he's got all of his scouts around him. You know, the folks have been in the game for decades, and they have most of them have a very traditional approach at what they're trying to do, and all the traditional assumptions. And basically, I can't say all the words he used, but he called a timeout and said, "Look, what are we really trying to do?" And he really basically challenged all those scouts with all that experience to think about the game so differently. And that's that. So when you answered that, Mike, that took me right back to that one, that scene in such a great movie. But that really is a universal best practice, right?
I mean, it is, and it's one of those things where it's, when people think about how do I launch SNOP, they tend to really try to overcomplicate it, quite frankly. And it really is as simple as, what problem are we trying to solve? And once everyone acknowledges that's the problem we're trying to solve, then we can start talking about the disciplines of SNOP. But if we don't get alignment around this is the problem, then we struggle, quite frankly. And then the organization is like, well, why are we doing this? And oftentimes when I talk to companies who've had a couple iterations of SNOP, right? We'll talk and say, hey, this is our third pass. And I say, well, what happened with the first two? Invariably, it's because we didn't really know where we were, what or how we were supposed to fix. We just didn't know. We couldn't articulate it. And that again, that's the key, is that the ability to articulate that problem.
How often do you hear that or something else? Or maybe what is the most frequent response you hear to what is it you're trying to solve?
So over the last year or so, it's been primarily inventory related. Either we've got too much inventory, it's in the wrong spots, so how do we more tactically move it around?
Mm-hmm.
The other one has been really around promotional demand, or a longer term event that's on the horizon that we're just unclear what demand's going to look like. And therefore, the supply decisions or the manufacturing decisions we need to make if we're vertically integrated, those are compromised. And what typically ends up happening is we get to the end of the window, end of a promotion, end of a season, and again, it's excess inventory. And now, what do I do with it, right? How do I get rid of it? Do I put it away? Do I put it in some other channel? So it really does end up manifesting itself more often than not with some type of inventory challenge. So
folks, again, we've got a precious hour here with Mike Griswold from Gartner. Get your questions in. It's an Ask Mike Griswold Anything hour. Think supply chain, retail, SNOP, leadership approaches, especially related to ESG and diversity and inclusion and things like that. So let us know what you're thinking, what you're dying to ask him. Because if not, I'm going to hog all the time. Greg and I are going to hog all the time with Mike. We got a lot of questions for him.
We're going to talk about basketball a lot.
That's right. And by the way, a big tip of the hat to Peter. Thanks so much for defining SNOP kind of in layman's terms there. Sometimes we use acronyms too quickly and we don't always spell them out. So Mike, last time you're with us, maybe back in November, I can't remember. Might have been the one episode where Greg was on assignment on a sailing vessel out in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere, really hating life. I'm trying to paint a beautiful picture because that was we got some great imagery there. But Mike, we had a ton of interest around some fascinating kind of next generation metrics or next generation approach to making metrics much more practical. Instead of, you think about that visual rolling into a plant, and some of those traditional plants, they've got this wall of metrics, and there are 1,000 different metrics, and you don't know what's important and what isn't. Talk to us about what you're seeing in this metric space.
Yeah, I think when I think about the metrics research that we're doing, we're really trying to evolve our perspective on metrics. So people that may be familiar with some of our research, we have what we refer to as a hierarchy of metrics, which basically, starts to whittle down the list, to your point, Scott. So we've got 10 or 15 that we think are at least a starting point around end-to-end supply chain performance. They start to help us think about metrics east-west and a little bit less north-south. They start to highlight for us trade-off decisions. So that framework has served us, I think, quite well over the years. We've got a retail version of that. I think, though, what we've started to realize is while those metrics are a good starting point, they're still fairly rearward looking. So we're looking, for example, on-shelf availability. That tells us you were in stock or you weren't, but that's what happened, sometime in the past. We're looking at inventory turns. Again, something that's kind of in the past. What we're starting to write more about and where we're really starting to push people is how do we get into what we would refer to as predictive analytics? How do I start to look at my data and start to try to make some predictions around metrics? One of the metrics that, just as an example, is we have a metric that we refer to as IQR, inventory quality ratio. We didn't come up with it, but we have found it and started to incorporate it in some of our metrics. And what IQR does is basically says, here's the pool of inventory you have. Here's what your forecast looks like. How much of this inventory is healthy versus unhealthy? So it starts us to go down that road of being more prescriptive. I have this inventory. Some of it's unhealthy. What do you want to do about it? And I think we on the Gartner side, and certainly encourage companies to start to try to find what are some of those predictive leading indicators. We certainly need some rearward-looking metrics. I don't want to give the impression that those are all, we don't need those anymore. But we do need people to start to think, looking forward, trying to get ahead of situations like inventory. And then ultimately, if you look at some of our research, we go from predictive to prescriptive, which actually says, in an IQR example, here's your unhealthy inventory. Oh, by the way, here's 3 tactics that you can use to get rid of the unhealthy inventory. That's the evolution that we're writing about and talking to companies about. I would say retail is probably no worse off than any other industry, quite frankly, which you won't often hear me say, when it comes to that movement between what we traditionally have done in terms of rearward looking and how do we get into predictive and prescriptive. But I think as industries, we need to find a way to move into that predictive area first. And I think those areas are certainly going to be things around the customer, things around inventory, and I think things around cost. Those, to me, are the 3 areas that we want to start to think about. How do we get more predictive?
So I appreciate you sharing some of that, and it is really fascinating how we're moving a lot of that visibility. We talked about time traveling, Greg, on the front end. we're doing some time traveling with decision making and just how far out we can kind of predict what happens. Yep. We got some interesting questions up. So finally, the floodgates are here. I want to kind of change directions here. Yep. By the way, Rich Richardson says visibility is still the fundamental issue from where he sits. But Peter, Peter always brings it on these live streams. He's got our first question for you, Mike. What would be your best recommendation for a procurement team just entering category management from silo procurement? Any thoughts there, Mike?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things that I see happening in category management, which is ultimately going to leak its way into procurement, and we touched on this maybe even last month, is what we're still seeing from a SKU proliferation perspective. So during COVID, we thought we did a good job of rationalizing SKUs and kind of thinning the herd. Merchants kind of got back in the game and decided that we wanted to start to expand some of our re-expand some of our assortments. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on procurement teams, right? This expansion and contraction of the assortment. My observation is, until we can put some discipline in the category management process around, more structure around end of life, as an example, for SKUs and for categories, until we're able to do that, I think we're still going to put a lot of pressure on the procurement department. So as a procurement team, one of my piece of advice would be is work with the category team to try to understand, do they have some type of SKU management, SKU rationalization process. It could be, before I was an analyst, we had finally put in place a very simple, if you're going to add an item, you have to delete an item, right? Simple as that.
Right.
Now, we probably could have gone, if you're going to add one, you need to take out 6, but we never really got to that point.
That's kind of how we manage our kids' snacks around here.
That's probably where it should have been. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's that category management discipline that definitely, I think if we can get better at that, that will definitely help the procurement folks.
So, Greg, I'll get you to weigh in on the same. I know this is a lot of this stuff we're talking about is your passion as well. Before I take the next question, Greg, any additional comments there?
Yeah, a couple things. One is procurement is facing the same issue that merchandising has faced in the long past. I mean, it used to be you owned a vendor, and I'm not sure if that's, Peter, what you mean by silo procurement, but I think about, Mike, the many ways that products have been aligned over the history in retail and manufacturing and distribution. I own this vendor, and that vendor might have products in automotive and sporting goods and hardware, right? But I think the alignment by category allows you to focus on a business issue or resolution to a particular problem or opportunity, and then use that knowledge in other related products as well. But it still does. I mean, I really empathize with the whole SKU rationalization thing. We talked with Verison last week, and that's essentially what they do for a lot of procurement teams is, over here, it's called a pail, and over here, it's called a bucket, and it's the same exact item, right? Just differently named in other areas. So there's a lot of data reconciliation that's required. I'd say that's a good start, Peter, to another good start to some of the areas that you're thinking about for sure. And, the idea of specializing by category or department or business solution area or something like that, that to me, and Mike, I'd love to get your kind of final thoughts on this, but specializing in an area was always more valuable to me, and I felt like more beneficial than specializing on a vendor.
Quick comment there, Mike, and we got about 17 questions for you.
I agree, Greg. I mean, I think to your earlier comment, the vendor landscape is just going to get more complex as vendors continue to diversify. So being aligned around a vendor can spread people pretty thin in terms of areas of expertise.
Yeah, no doubt.
Love it. And I also love the material truth. Going back to that Verison.
What a great catchphrase that is, right?
It makes me think of a boxer. I can't remember who there was a boxer that had truth woven into their name, but nevertheless, I want to
say the last name was Williamson, but I'm not sure.
Yes, we're going to look that up.
Floyd the Truth. I don't know. We'll figure it out. So I'll look right now.
That's right. Great. Amrita. So she asked a question and then kind of further clarifies. I want to pose this to you, Mike. So for our listeners that may be listening to the replay, read this off. For example, so during COVID, the inventory was full and we kept adding products much more than than they were moving back out. How can we manage such situations like this? And she probably represents thousands and thousands of supply chain practitioners out there.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen from some companies is they've really asked themselves, how flexible can we be around demand sensing and demand shaping? So what I mean by that is we've got this extra inventory. Can we go to our merchandising partners and talk about some maybe unscheduled promotions as an example? We know in the merchandising environment, there's usually a promotions calendar, pretty well thought out for a long window of time. Can we build some flexibility into that allows us to address some of these, over inventoried situations where we can maybe, pop up, a promotion for a week or a 2-week promotion in some of these areas where we might be a little bit heavy. I'm definitely seeing folks, although, it's interesting, you talk to the traditional kind of clearance off brand channel, and about 3 months into COVID, they were full, right? And they pretty much had the pick of the litter in terms of whose excess inventory do they want to bring into their environment. So this idea of pop-up promotions might be one thing to think about. Are there other disposition strategies? I've heard some people trying to create their own little marketplace where maybe they can get rid of some of that in a more non-traditional way. But I think if we think about kind of the demand and supply capability that retailers have, this idea of creating some demand for these products might be one way to tackle it.
Yeah, well said there.
I think also we have to. Sorry, I looked that up. Carl the Truth Williams is who it was. I wasn't too far off.
Not Carl.
Carl. Yeah, I'm not a very good typist. But I think one of the things we've got to do is we rely so much on what I love to call postcasting. It's like, oh my gosh, we had this big spike in the past. We better try to hit that for the future. And to your earlier point, Mike, around SNOP and some best practices around that, it's to cease to or lessen the inclination to do that and start to look to the future, indicators of the future. Maybe not look at the numbers of the past, but look at the indicators or influencers of demand of the past and see if we see those influencers or indicators occurring in the future, rather than just simply grabbing the quantity and buying it again. We sold 200,000 more than we expected to. We better bring 200,000 extra in, because that is typically how we do it. And when we start shifting our view to really forecasting, really looking at what influences demand, then I think that helps us be a lot better going forward.
Excellent points. Excellent points there from you both. And we could have a planning and forecasting marathon conversation, I'm sure. Both of y'all bring so much goodness to the table there. Let's so Mike Darden here. So this is interesting timing. I love this question that we're going to pose to you. Co-opetition is a term I heard an Apex colleague use years ago, and it really has just stuck with me. And then it recircled. We were talking about the re-commerce market yesterday. Kind of on the heels of our live stream, Greg, with Tony Schroeder and the Reverse Logistics Association, where they're really proliferating returns best practices. And a LinkedIn poster, I can't remember his name, but he talked about how the new clothing apparel markers could roll out some products to compete with the re-commerce. And in my view, they've got to embrace it. It's more co-opetition. Sure, used versus new, there's going to be, there's always been competition there. However, in this age, these retailers need to really figure out how to really, in a meaningful way, lean into the re-commerce market, which is supposed to be, according to Forbes, a $54 billion market by 2023. So Mike, to our listeners, Mike says here, I'd love to hear Mike's perspective on standards adoption to drive interconnectedness and interoperability. Co-opetition. Now, Mike probably is not talking about the re-commerce market. He may be referring more to blockchain and some of those evolving standards there. But speak to these topics a bit, if you would.
Yeah, when I saw Mike's question, I immediately went to, and it may align. Hopefully, it aligns a little bit with where Mike was going with his question. I was thinking about one of the big macro trends we saw in our 2020 supply chain top 25, which was this idea of purpose-driven organizations kind of recognizing that while they're, one of their missions is obviously a financial return mission, they've also realized that their missions are much broader than that. And what we started to see in this purpose-driven organizations is organizations banding together to solve a common problem. An example, Starbucks and McDonald's banding together to create a standard around a plastic cup. They compete with each other, obviously, but they work together to create a standard around this cup to start to help the environment. I'm seeing a lot more of that happen in that environmental ESG arena, where people are saying, hey, look, we might compete, but we have the same problem, whether it's a plastics problem, whether it's a waste problem, whatever it might be, a carbon footprint problem. I'm finding more and more organizations kind of not worrying about the competitive ramifications and working together like Starbucks and McDonald's in that example to deal with some of these environmental issues. I don't know, to Mike's question, whether I've got examples of competitors working together, let's say from back to our sourcing question, right? From a procurement perspective, I don't know that I see much of that happening, but I'm definitely seeing that happen in tackling some of the environmental issues.
I think we've seen it in the past with EDI standards, and probably something similar will be necessary for blockchain or other API interconnectedness. I mean, I couldn't even hazard a guess of how many API standards there are out there, and they are basically one-off. So I could see some value in a item is always here and quantity is always here, for instance, something like that. There's certainly some value in that.
And I definitely think to the earlier question, or the earlier comment someone had on visibility, I think to Mike's question, the interoperability
Right, that
is going to be targeted, I think, towards visibility. And how do we create a set or a more visible set of transactions between trading partners? You mentioned EDI, you mentioned ASNs. I think if we could give retailers Truth Serum, my sense is those are both underutilized transactions for lots of different reasons, right? It could be technology, it could be just lack of awareness. So I do think in the area of visibility, that's one area we're going to start to see, I think, more progress made in the area of more standard ways that people can connect.
Yeah. Love that. So I'm going to share a couple comments, and then we've got a great question from Daria here in just a moment. Rhonda's talking about social media is changing the marketing game, certainly changing the supply chain marketing game as well. Paula loves, as do I, add an item, delete an item. It's that simple. Need to adopt that philosophy.
Adopt it at home.
Yes, no, true.
And let's see here. Bear with me 1 minute here. So Peter, can we do an entire hour on this? We went marketing, IT, airports. Even then, we had to cross over on suppliers within the departments, right? Breaking through the silos that he was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. So let's get to Daria's question. And first off, before we pose it, Daria, congrats on a new role. I saw it on LinkedIn, I think earlier today or something. So hopefully, hopefully all is well with you. Congrats. He says, "Hey, Mike, do you view DDMRP, demand-driven material requirement planning, focusing on strategic inventory decoupling and buffer level management materializing in a complex supply chain setup, given a transition from traditional MRP setup focusing on statistical forecasts to market demand?" That's quite a question.
Wow.
Well, we can see why Daria got a new job, because he is batting, way over my batting average there.
So I guess I don't know that I can answer, to be perfectly honest, right? I don't know that I can answer that to the degree that it probably deserves, given that I don't have kind of that materials planning background. Let me maybe try to answer it maybe in a different way, Greg, and then see where you want to take it as well, and Scott. Sure. I definitely see during COVID across manufacturing and retail and vertically integrated retailers a complete review of their approaches to when and where and how much inventory are we going to put across the supply chain. I'm definitely seeing, we may have even talked about this a little bit last month, right? I'm seeing this idea of just in time has kind of gone out the window. People are much more comfortable with buffering inventory in different nodes, if for no other reason than to create some responsiveness to things like COVID and other disruptions. So if I extrapolate that maybe into a manufacturing environment, I do think we're going to find people more apt to err on the side of dispersed inventory as opposed to trying to really hone in on a statistical forecast, because the data for almost anybody over the last year, I guess I would say, is probably suspect at best.
Right.
And even with machine learning and AI, right, the time it takes to teach a machine with this, different looking data, I think is going to be challenging. So probably not an answer to the exact question, but I think where I would take it is encouraging companies to be a little bit more open and flexible about how much and where you deploy inventory, and thinking about inventory at least as that initial buffer for uncertainty versus trying to really hone a statistical forecast. I don't know, Greg, your thoughts? Scott, your thoughts?
In sort of trying to whatever you want to say, deconstruct this question, I think of it from my perspective on looking at MRP and manufacturing and indirect and direct materials procurement from the perspective of a retailer, where we deal with finished goods, where we deal with buffer inventory as strategic inventory. We don't decouple it. Buffer inventory is the strategic inventory, and the strategy is to maximize customer experience without breaking the bank, to put it overly simplistically, right? And I think that because those techniques have been in play for so long at the retail tier of supply chain, that there is an opportunity to move those techniques, those methodologies, and adapt them as you go upstream, at least I call it upstream, into distribution and manufacturing and even materials management. So that's, when I think about the problems we talk about, when I talk to the folks at Verison about their customers, and when I talk to other folks about tiers of the supply chain above retail, it's the opportunity to apply the precise science that retail has always used to manufacturing. And the reason that retail has such advanced science relative to manufacturing is because the margins are so much tighter, right? You're looking at 1 to 3% net margin as a retailer, whereas you're talking 9 to 22% net margin after taxes as a manufacturer. They've been able to be sloppy with their inventory management and have certainly been. So now if they think of this as a risk management as well as a cost optimization exercise, they can start to deploy some of those techniques that are used more precisely at the lower tiers of the supply chain.
I think the other thing we'll see, Greg, and I agree with you completely, and we've started to see this, is another way to kind of handle that complex question is also fundamentally, how do you want to design your network? And we're finding more and more retailers investing in, a network design capability, both from a skill set and from a tool set perspective, because I think what they're now realizing is we have these assets, distribution centers, micro fulfillment centers, stores, and we have this inventory. What's the best way for us to start to position and configure that? And, we're seeing, upgrades into the supply chain with these skill sets and with these tools. So I think that's another way that retailers are going to try to tackle this is through the design of their network. Can we have more partners outside of our ecosystem to help manage the inventory? So the network design piece is another way I think people are going to try to tackle this.
Yeah, yep. I agree.
I had a flashback to Apex conference in Vegas just a couple of years ago. DDMRP dominated the discussion. So great question there, Daria. I want to share a couple quick comments, and then I want to change gears on a different topic in the little bit of time we got left with you, Mike. First off, Adrian, just in time, saved me millions on inventory. Money in the bank grows. Money on the shelf is stagnant. Good point there, Adrian. Rich, going back to interoperability. I'm taking it a little bit slower this go around.
Yeah, good idea. We should all do that.
As VP, he says, community development for GS1, world's largest supply chain standards organization. I often brought competitors together around the table to solve common interoperability problems. That is such a
Garden, make that phone call right now.
That's right. But that's how we're going to be able to solve these issues of sustainability, of some of the diversity and inclusion issues, some of the the greatest challenges of our time, and we're seeing it play out with the noble mission, with distribution of the vaccine. The U.S. government, at least, is for the time being kind of putting a halt on some monopoly challenges and bringing these competitors together to break through some of the challenges we're seeing. So I love that sentiment, Rich, and gone are the day. in some cases, gone are the days of throwing elbows at all. Fierce competition is a good thing, but bringing people together to really break through some of these universal challenges is a breath of fresh air. All right, so I want to go back to a great question we got. We got about 1,000 comments. Questions. My scrolling finger is getting worn out here. We've gotten so many comments here.
A blister on my thumb from scrolling here.
we had a question here about careers and kind of how fast technology is going, and I want to pose this to you. It's
this
from
one, Gouda.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, Greg.
I saw that one and it caught my eye.
So this is from Gouda. And they say, how do you see the future of sourcing roles after all these pandemic and digitalization is taking place? In other words, how many years do we have to live? Question mark.
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I find interesting is if you look at kind of the characteristics, if I move us, say, into machine learning, AI, and automation, if you think about the characteristics in a procurement cycle, the characteristics of some procurement decisions, they would seem to, and again, not a sourcing or procurement professional, but they would seem to lend themselves to automation type of activities, right? We can build business rules. There's certainly decision criteria that we could build into a tool that says, hey, this is the contract price, we're going to negotiate, however it might be. You would think that those areas would fit pretty neatly into that automation, AI, ML discussion. Having said that, I mean, those aren't happening. The discussions around automation are happening much more in the transactional supply chain. How do we automate forecasts? How do we automate replenishment? How do we get people out of touching every forecast and touching every order? And how do we automate purchase orders? So I have not heard of a lot of discussion around how do we take, the sourcing people out of the process. What I am hearing is how do we take forecasters and replenishers and allocators, how do we take them out of the process? Having said that, though, I do believe that if you were to look at kind of the criteria by which you would automate something, I think there's a lot of boxes that you could check in sourcing and procurement. So I'm not hearing those discussions, but I also am not comfortable saying that they won't start to pop up just because of the nature of the job.
Yep. Greg?
I think there are certain aspects of sourcing that will be very difficult to automate. I was just talking to a company yesterday about how they select the company that will provide the tooling for the production of, they have a thing called a jog-along stroller, and it's brilliant device, by the way, but it's very technically complex. And we started talking about cooling speeds for the plastics, the PVCs, and the metals that are used in the construction of these things, and how you have to find a vendor that cools at the right speed to give you the right whatever, break tolerance or whatever. And also there is, especially in sourcing, especially when you're talking about procurement, real procurement, right? Separate from replenishment or purchasing. When you think about that, you have to think about the relationship or the multitude of relationships. And as a wise man, Scott Luton and or someone else said, until two computers can sit down and have a beer or a bottle of tequila or a bottle of rice wine and start to speak the same language in terms of having a business understanding, then there will always be people involved in that, right?
Yep. I appreciate that attribution. I'm not sure who said that, Greg, but it was a great live stream comment, I believe.
Yeah, somebody did, and we've co-opted it, haven't we?
Well,
there are no new jokes, just new audiences.
Well, and by the way, complete sidebar, I did co-opt a great phrase you had not too long ago with our friend Jasmine Crow with Gooder. And we interviewed, and so Mike, this is a wonderful business that is tackling food waste and starvation and folks that are going without in a very meaningful, practical way. And at the end of our conversation with Jasmine, Greg says, "Don't do good, do gooder." And it was such a wonderful. It's like Greg White, creative Greg White in a microcosm. So I co-opted that yesterday, Greg. Ken, if I can just add one more thing here, 2 quick points for any of the practitioners out there, for whatever it's worth. We talk a lot about technology, as we should, about just how much it is transforming the global business, global life, for that matter, right? Not just supply chain, and that's a beautiful thing, because I believe, and I think most of us believe, that it's going to open up doors of opportunities for folks that really apply themselves and really want to do and learn new things day in and day out. So 2 quick tips or what have you for supply chain practitioners that may be looking over their shoulder a bit at where technology, hey, really dive into the business of not just your role, but really the organization. And from a planning and forecasting, as Greg and Mike both have alluded to, there's some wonderful art involved in some of that, as much science as there is. And it's amazing just how much more science there is, diving in and really understanding. And then also understanding upstream and downstream from your role. If you really understand how decisions made here, it has a ripple effect or has an upstream impact or what have you, you make yourself much more valuable to the organization. And great leaders are going to find new challenges to assign you to, as technology may usurp some of your responsibilities. So never fear. There's lots of opportunities ahead due to the vast and rapidly growing digital transformation of global business. Okay,
Scott, let me just piggyback on that real quick.
Yeah,
because I heard you when I listened to you say that, I'm taken back to the movie Hidden Figures with the women who they basically saw their job was going to be eliminated, so they learned how to program, right? And I think that's to me, Scott, is a great example of what you just described. People will need to start to think about what's not necessarily next, but what's the next, and how do I apply myself and learn whatever I need to learn about the next. And I think Hidden Figures is a great example of that.
Yeah, great point. And I think Greg and I both agree, and our team will agree. I know Amanda agrees. If you have not seen the movie Hidden Figures, do yourself a favor and go see it tonight or this weekend.
So inspirational.
Yes. Agreed. All right. Complete. Moving right along. I want to share a comment or two, and then we're going to let Mike go. David says, that is exactly how Skynet is going to start.
Yes.
Did you see what Lee said?
No. Here we go. Going backwards here.
Oh, sorry.
So Lee offered up 2 machines drinking you and discussing supply chain management. Pretty scary thought. And then David says that's exactly how Skynet's going to start, Lee. We're doing jokes in reverse here today. It's Bizarro Day on Supply Chain Now. Mike, always a pleasure. I got to tell you, this was not planned at all. And usually everything we do is planned. This is a very frank, speaking of Hidden Figures. So I had an opportunity to meet with Minda Hartz, who wrote the memo. I was on a panel with her at NRF, or as part of NRF, kind of key takeaway programming a few weeks back. Fascinating, inspirational. She had probably the quote of our session, which was, "We got to make work for everyone." And really, there's so many different ways that can apply. Well, this book here, we were going to do a giveaway. I was going to share it after we kind of swooped you out, but kind of on the heels of Hidden Figures, and with that sentiment of how we've got to make work for everyone. The memo is all about quote, "what women of color need to know to secure a seat at the table," end quote, by Minda Hartz. I have not gotten through it all the way just yet, but we're going to give a free copy away to any of our US based community members. So if you're interested in the book, Greg, what's the neat question we can pose and have folks answer? Well, I'll tell you what, if you're interested, just shoot a note to Amanda at supplychainnow.com. We'll if we have to do a drawing, we'll do a drawing. But I've kind of thumbed through this and picked an anecdote here and there. It's a fascinating read, so y'all check that out.
I think here's the question I would ask: who likes Scott Luton the best, and why? Answer that question, and I'll be the judge of the answers.
Oh, there gosh. You go. Greg, you're too much. Greg, hang out for just a minute. Mike, such a pleasure. reconnect. You know, it took us just a second to start getting those questions in, due probably to the delays we've got. But we so much enjoy what you bring, you know, to our community month in and month out. We see it in the comments as well. Let's make sure folks know how to connect with you and Gartner.
Mike.Griswold, Gartner.com, and I am working on my LinkedIn stuff, so be patient.
Oh, good on you. So soon we'll know that you work at Gartner.
Yes, soon. Yes, very soon. Either that or I've won Powerball, Greg. One of the two.
You're right.
Well,
then you become a professional amateur basketball coach, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, good.
So Rich Richardson, he sent me a link I couldn't get to because of how things are situated, all about, I think, mallow, where we could purchase mallow cups in bulk. And I couldn't quite put it out there as we swept you out, but we'll save that for next time. Mike, always a pleasure. Mike Griswold, Vice President, Analyst with Gartner. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks, guys.
To take all these questions on the fly. I really appreciate that, Mike.
My pleasure, guys. Bye-bye.
See you.
He's perfect for this session. He really is. My brain cannot keep up.
Unflappable, right? Agreed. I mean, absolutely unflappable. But you know what? Years of being in retail and being flapped a lot will make you unflappable. Plus, he sits in such a perfect spot over, you know, his overview of the industry is so fantastic. And being someone so knowledgeable, as everyone can see from his comments, you know, it's more than just a valuable guide, for which it was for me as a technology provider, but also for anyone who's been in industry. They can relate and they can trust that he's providing them with good information because he probably deployed it or recognized that he should have deployed it or should have gotten the opportunity to deploy it at the very least. So tremendously valuable knowledge there.
Completely agree. Really enjoy our sessions and really, y'all, I love your kind of your kindred spirits around some of these key topics. We're going to have just a dedicated hour with the Mike and Greg hour. So to our community, thanks so much. I know we couldn't get to all the comments here today and the questions. Really appreciate that. Don't forget, shoot Amanda a note if you're interested in a free copy of the memo. I promise you're not going to regret that read based on what I've seen and all the feedback Minda Hartz has gotten. And connect with her on LinkedIn, by the way. She's one of the top voices there. It is the big game week. It is Super Bowl week. My voice is still with us here. We're fighting a little congestion, I believe, here, Greg. I want to put you on the spot because we haven't I think I fat fingered the solo layout about halfway through. I want to do a solo layout and get you to point to a couple of your favorite Kansas City Chiefs gear there.
Okay. Let's see if I can figure out right there. That jersey is Otis Taylor, who is the reason that I fell in love with football and started playing football and wore number 89, even though when I started playing football, I was slow and fat and was a center. Otis Taylor got in a fight with Ben Davidson during a Chiefs game because he speared their quarterback, Len Dawson. And I was present, by the way, when that very photograph right there of Len Dawson was autographed, which is so rare these days, right? Ben Davidson, after a play, hit him with his helmet in the back, Len Dawson, and Otis Taylor, the wide receiver, came over and shoved the guy down and started a big old fight. And I just thought, that's the kind of player, right? A wide receiver. If a wide receiver can be that tough, that's the kind of player I want to be. So that inspired me. And of course, Patrick Mahomes. Dang, I can't even figure out which hand, right? My wife got me the most expensive box of cereal ever on the planet. What is it called? Mahomes Magic Crunch. Look, I'm a huge fan. Jamal Charles, he'll always be 25 to me, even though two great players, Shady McCoy and now Clyde Edwards-Helaire, have worn number 25. Both have asked permission of Jamal Charles, who retired not so long ago, and for a number of years was the Chiefs offense. We ran the ball to him. We threw the ball to him. He did everything but play quarterback. We were so short on talent. We ran that poor guy to death. And he actually got traded away at one point to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He also played one more season somewhere else. But then But then the Chiefs signed him during the Super Bowl season to a one-day contract so he could get a Super Bowl ring. We're working on the roof. Hey, flashback, Scott. They're working on the roof right over my head.
Well, hey, really quick, and we'll close on this. Azalea's got a great question here. I'll tell you what's some of my favorites. Kia had a wonderful ad in the last year or two. The Coca-Cola company, Apple. It seems like Doritos really gets creative with their sense of humor. Those are some of those that stick out to me.
About a John Travolta and like a Scott's, some sort of fertilizer or a company or a yard materials company. I heard that's a pretty cool commercial. So
that's right.
Shot on his iPhone.
Lee says, don't forget to mention your safety, Armani Watts, who went to A&M.
Yeah.
Lee, we found out something about Lee. How about that? And Peter loves your passion for your team. I do too. I admire passion's always a good thing, regardless if it's sports or business or causes or you name it. So, all right. So we're going to have to leave it at that. Clay is saying something.
Mecole Hardman. He's a dog. I call him Dog Gone because whenever he gets the ball, he is gone. He's a Georgia Bulldog. So
love it.
Got a Super Bowl ring in his rookie season. How about that?
Man, it's awesome.
Amazing.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it leave it there. What a great wide-ranging hour with one of our favorites, Mike Griswold with Gartner. Hopefully you enjoyed it, community, as much as we did. Thanks for all the comments, the questions, so much expertise. Gary Smith, we couldn't get you and many others, but really appreciate y'all jumping into the conversation here today. Don't forget about the book. Don't forget about the webinars, and don't forget about those Kansas City Chiefs that are going to lay a whooping on Tom Brady and the dirty, dirty dogs over at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll see. But hey, we've got a live stream to go.
No peg leg pirate is going to catch the cheetah.
But hey, tomorrow, really quick heads up. Tomorrow at 12 noon, we've got Jenny Froome, who leads SAPIX, and we've got the CEO of Zippy. Kabir is his first name. I don't have his last name with me, but we're going to be talking about supply chain leadership across the continent of Africa. So tune in 12 noon Eastern time and bring your voice. And with that, on behalf of Greg White, our entire team here, big thanks to Clay and Amanda behind the scenes, our guest, Mike Griswold. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. On that note, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.